When COVID was at its height, I was playing Final Fantasy XIV on Christmas. And there was something about playing the final zone of Endwalker that hit me really hard. I think the circumstances that I was facing felt very overwhelming. I felt very alone, even though I truly wasn't. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I needed a narrative that would cleanse my mind. And there are many narratives out there that have this capability. The problem is we often forget about them, or we set them aside thinking that they're not as important, when in reality they still have as much importance for us today as they did long ago. One such case is A Little Princess by Francis Hodgson Burnett. For some reason I picked it up and I read through it. It took me about a day. I'm a fast reader. And one of the things that I really liked about this story in the past was this roller coaster that the young heroine went on. And there was something about the pathos of her life. It was much like Oliver Twist, but, dumbed down, so to speak. Oliver Twist is something else. Although, out of all of the books that Charles Dickens wrote, Oliver Twist is the second easiest before Christmas Carol. So what is A Little Princess all about? A Little Princess is about a 10-year-old girl called Sara Crewe who moves from India to England. Her father places her at a boarding school called Miss Minchin's boarding school. She is treated like a princess. Her father's very wealthy. And when there's news of a diamond mine, she's treated even more specially. But throughout this kind of kerfuffle, Sara is still thinking some deep thoughts about herself. She's a very mature young girl. And eventually her fortunes take a nosedive for the worst. And the story is about what happens to Sara and what kind of person does she prove to herself to be. Who is she and what is she? And this is a very warm-hearted, happy ending type of story. Spoiler. But, of course, it is currently, nowadays, usually sold as being children's literature. But back in the day, it was actually considered to be standard fare for both adults and children. This would be something that adults would read aloud at night, and a lot of kids could listen in as well. So this is basically the late 1800s version of a Disney movie. And there's something for everyone to really enjoy. One of the great things about Burnett's books is that they're usually fairly easy to read. You can get through them fairly quickly. It should take you about a weekend. If you're a slow reader, a week maximum. It really is not that difficult. The volume is quite slim, especially when you get it in paperback. The writing is, in my opinion, standard fare. It's not super prosy like Ellen Montgomery. So I think Burnett has a much more straightforward style. There's still a lot of pathos. There's still a lot of description, but it's not so heavy. There's a good amount of conversation to exposition. I think overall it's a solid book. If you are interested in trying out a kid's literature, although this is not initially supposed to be for children, we now consider it to be children's literature. And if you're looking for something easy to read, incredibly enjoyable, you probably could get this for free in some kind of audiobook on YouTube. If this sounds like a interesting story that you'd like to try out, I highly recommend reading A Little Princess. Okay, now let's get into the spoilers. The thing about A Little Princess is the title alone makes you think that this is a story for girls, but it is actually a story for all humans, in my opinion. And the story of A Little Princess, for me, I think is very, very valuable for us today because it's the story of character. It is a story of who are you when life gets tough. And in a world where we are becoming increasingly aware that not everything revolves around us, our reactions to disappointments in life have become incredibly crucial. You have tons of people these days who are falling to their knees and screaming in public and behaving like absolute infants when things aren't going their way. You have people rushing out and rioting and throwing bricks and behaving like absolute hooligans because things aren't going their way. You have people seeking out echo chambers on the internet and sitting around complaining to their friends in little circles on, 4chan or 8chan or whatever it is that they're chatting on, Reddit, Twitter, and because because they they haven't figured out how to actually work through certain things on their own and remain productive and helpful in society despite overwhelming odds. Sara Crewe's character, like many fairy tales, almost like a fairy tale, is a model for behavior. And maybe that is why this kind of book has been set aside, because it's a call to higher living. It's a call to better behavior. And it is a call to self-respect. It's a call to resilience. It's a call to self-discipline. It's a call to a form of stoicism that has been misunderstood and misconstrued as being toxic. So I'm going to go a bit into spoilers. If you have not read A Little Princess and you want to read it and experience it for yourself, stop the video here, for real. But if you don't care and you think you will never read it, I'm going to get into some of the general story outline, and then I'm going to talk about some of the afterword in this particular book that I have. Okay, so in this book, Sara's dad drops her off at a boarding school. The idea is he's going to be working in India, and when she turns 16 or 18, she will return as a finished young lady and live with her father and probably find someone and have a lovely life afterwards. Things go well at the beginning. So for the first couple chapters, things are going quite well. She's treated very, very well by the headmistress, who is a smarmy git. And this lady, Miss Minchin, is money grubbing and very, very mean. And she hates Sara. And deep down, she begrudges Sara quite a bit. And Sara can see through her. Sara is a very, very mature young lady. She lost her mother at an early age. And she's a very worldly young person who understands that this is how things are. And basically, when news arrives that her father has found a diamond mine, she's lauded as being basically a princess. And she's treated like a princess. But soon after the heels of this miraculous diamond mine discovery, news comes that her father has died and that the diamond mines were lost. There's no way of recovering them, and she is now penniless. And Miss Minchin strips Sara of all of her belongings, leaving her only with her doll, and she is sent up to the attic where she lives beside Becky, the scullery maid, and she is basically treated like crap. Her life goes from princess to pauper, and it's a fantastic juxtaposition because through this change, we get to see a couple things. First off, we get to see what happens to Sara's character as she is faced with genuine opposition. You see, this is something that Sara herself questions. Sara wonders, am I actually going to be that great? Am I actually that nice? And the answer is that she actually is. She's actually kind-hearted. She's not racist. She's not classist. She's a genuinely good person in a genuinely difficult and often corrupt world. The question is, does she have resilience? And very early on in the story, there is a bit of foreshadowing. She is talking with one of the 3 people she makes friends with at the school. And the first person she connects with is Ermengarde. Ermengarde is a overweight, not very bright young girl, and Sara takes her under her wing and makes a friend of her. One day while they're talking, Sara says, "Things happen to people by accident. A lot of nice accidents have happened to me. It just happened that I always liked lessons and books and could remember things when I learned them. It just happened that I was born with a father who was beautiful and nice and clever and could give me everything I liked. Perhaps I have not really a good temper at all. But if you have everything you want and everyone is kind to you, how can you help but be good-tempered? I don't know. Looking quite serious. How I shall ever find out whether I'm really a nice child or a horrid one. Perhaps I'm a hideous child, and no one will ever know, just because I never have any trials. Lavinia has no trials, said Ermengarde stolidly, and she is horrid enough. Sara rubbed the end of her little nose reflectively as she thought the matter over. Well, she said at last, perhaps that is because Lavinia is growing. So as you can see here, Sara is a very gracious person, for one thing. But another thing is Sara's already thinking about how trials create character, and she does not feel like she has been confronted yet with reality to a large degree. She is very much aware of differences between herself and everyone else. She's always being called clever. People tell her that she's beautiful, even though she thinks she's not beautiful, but everyone tells her that she's very pretty. And when she meets people who are different, she is generally very, very good-tempered young lady. She treats Ermengarde, the overweight girl who's not very smart, as a friend. She makes friends with Lottie, a motherless child who has a victim complex, and Sara bonds with her over the fact that neither of them have mothers, and she comforts Lottie. And then there's Becky, the scullery maid, with whom she builds a friendship, and this shows that she's not really concerned about the differences in class in terms of valuing people for who they are. And at first, things seem to be going really well, and there's news of a diamond mine and everything. But on the day that she's having her birthday, and they're all talking about this diamond mine, she's basically a princess, and the solicitor shows up and says, hey, Captain Crewe died. He's actually penniless. His friend defrauded him. There's no diamond mine. We've been bamboozled. Blah, 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 blah. And Miss Minchin, who has low-key hated Sara from day one, takes this opportunity to take Sara down a peg or two. She sends Sara up to the attic instantly with only a doll and her mourning clothes. And from that time onward, Sara's life is basically, she's a drudge. Because of her education, she is given the task of helping teaching and watching over the younger ones. But essentially, she's working for room and board, and her room and board aren't great. She's not getting enough food. She starts losing weight. Miss Minchin's younger sister, who's helping her run the school, Miss Amelia, is commenting like, hey, maybe we, like, is this right? And Miss Minchin just doesn't care. And Sara is faced with cruelty, is faced with neglect, is faced with abuse in many cases, and is challenged. She always wants to be like the soldiers who go to war. Okay, so this was her role model. Because her mother died, her role model was her father. And early on, she shares with Ermengarde how she equates her resiliency with that of being a soldier. Sara says, I promised him I would bear it, she said, and I will. You have to bear things. Think what soldiers bear. Papa is a soldier. There was a war. He would have to bear marching and thirstiness and perhaps deep wounds. And he would never say a word, not one word. And so Sara carries this in herself, and she literally shuts her emotions down. Now, does this mean she's emotionless? No. It means that when she leaves her bedroom and the confines of her space, she carries herself as if she were a princess. And bizarrely enough, or not so bizarrely, this drives Miss Minchin even crazier, because Miss Minchin is expecting her to be cowed, is expecting her to be, flattened by what's going on. But basically, Sara is not. Sara is crushed, but she's not broken. And she really, really struggles with her life. She struggles with hunger. She's struggling with the cold. She's struggling with the lack of care. She's struggling with an uncertain future. There's no ends to her struggle, but in the midst of her struggle, she is telling herself that can't determine how I behave in front of the others. I'm not going to start name calling. I'm not going to start crying. I'm not going to start breaking down and having rage fits. I'm not going to have a tantrum. None of that's going to help anyway. And so she practices a form of stoicism that I think is sadly lacking within the people of our society, men, women, and children. And what is so fascinating as well is part of what keeps her on this in this mind frame is the understanding that there are people who are struggling even worse than her. The world is not just about her. She is also ever looking outwards. So she's looking at people like the big family that she watches, and she's looking at what they are doing. She's looking at Becky's life and how difficult Becky has it compared to her. And a very sick gentleman moves in next door with an Indian servant, and she reaches out and helps the Indian servant catch his runaway monkey and speaks Hindustani, I'm guessing, to this Indian servant, showing that she, even in the midst of her misery, she's trying to help him. She's trying to make him feel at home in this dreary world that is far from his native land. And honestly, she's not focused on herself all the time. Now, she has moments where she nearly breaks down, right? She has moments where she's crushed, where she yells at her doll because she realizes, like, this is her reality, right? And when she breaks down, she says, "You're nothing but a doll, nothing but a doll. You care for nothing. You're stuffed with sawdust. You never had a heart. Nothing could ever make you feel. You are a doll." And then she's crying, and the doll's lying on the floor. After a while, she raised her face and looked at Emily, who seemed to be gazing at her round the side of one angle, and somehow by this time actually with a kind of glassy-eyed sympathy. Sara bent, picked her up. Remorse overtook her. She even smiled at herself, a very little smile. "You can't help being a doll," she said, with a resigned sigh, "any more than Lavinia and Jessie can help not having any sense. We're not all made alike. Perhaps you do your sawdust best." So this kind of situation, right, shows that Sara has moments of weakness. But she, despite her internal struggles, which are very, very real, she's still providing for us a model of how to behave when we are disappointed in life. I think Seneca would approve of Sara. And one of the very, very interesting things as well is that she is a bit prideful. And so it's a matter of pride for her not to break down in front of Miss Minchin. And yeah, she relies on her imagination to help her through this, to help prop this up. And she uses essentially some forms of types of therapy, basically, to kind of visualize herself as behaving better or being treated better, or having justice one day. And it's very, 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 very interesting. And so one day she has a confrontation with Miss Minchin, and she's basically imagining that she's a real princess, and Miss Minchin boxes her ears, which is, clapping your hands over someone's ears, which is, anyway. And she tells Miss Minchin that she was thinking, and so there's this back and forth. And then she says, "I was thinking that you do not know what you were doing, that I did not know what I was doing, Miss Minchin fairly gasped. Yes, said Sara, and I was thinking what would happen if I were a princess and you boxed my ears, what I should do to you. And I was thinking that if I were one, you would never dare to do it, whatever I said or did. And I was thinking how surprised and frightened you would be if you suddenly found out. And then she basically draws on that belief. And Miss Minchin's like, what? She explained, found out what? And Sara goes, that I was really a princess, says Sara, and could do anything that I liked. And Miss Minchin freaks out. So the interesting part about this is Sara doesn't actually, she's not faking it. She's literally taking on the behaviors of the princess as though she's a princess, even though she is not a princess. And this drives Miss Minchin crazy because no matter what she does to Sara, she cannot take away Sara's self-respect. But what's very important about the self-respect is this isn't some sort of emotional, self-coddling, entitled self-love that results in temper tantrums and making people uncomfortable and forcing people to do what you want. This self-respect leads to the control of one's emotions. And what this also basically results in is that Sara is thinking about herself, but she's thinking about herself critically. She's not thinking about herself all the time. And one day she finds money in the gutter. And so she goes into the baker lady's place and she's so hungry and she asks what she could get with this penny, and the baker lady gives her 6 buns of bread. But on her way in, she sees a child that is in worse condition than her. Okay, so her life is already shitty. Her life already sucks. She's starving. She's hungry. She's wet. She's tired. She's been running around all the time, right? She's basically like, she's actually worse off than Charlie Bucket. At least Charlie Bucket had his family, right? But then she looked sideways and she saw something that made her stop. This is what Burnett writes. It was a little figure more forlorn even than herself, a little figure which was not much more than a bundle of rags, from which small bare red muddy feet peeped out, only because the rags with which their owner was trying to cover them were not long enough. Above the rags appeared a shock head of tangled hair and dirty face with big, hollow, hungry eyes. Sara knew they were hungry eyes the moment she saw them, and she felt a sudden sympathy. This, she said to herself with a little sigh, is one of the populace, and she is hungrier than I. And so she goes in to get this bread, and she manages to get six buns from the lady, and she gives five of the 6 to the homeless girl. And when the baker lady realizes this, the baker lady is transformed. So the baker woman looks out of her shop and says, well, I never. If that young'un hasn't given her buns to the beggar child, it wasn't because she didn't want them either. Well, she looked hungry enough. I'd give something to know what she did it for. So this gets to her, right? Curiosity overcomes her. So she goes to the beggar child, this baker woman, and says, who gave you those buns? The child nodded her head towards Sara's vanishing figure. What did she say? Inquired the woman. Asked me if I was hungry, replied the hoarse voice. What did you say? Said I was just. And then she came in and got the buns and gave them to you, did she? The child nodded. How many? 5. The woman thought it over. Left just one for herself, she said in a low voice, and she could have eaten the whole 6. I saw it in her eyes. She looked after the little draggled faraway figure and felt more disturbed in her usually comfortable mind than she felt for many a day. I wish she hadn't gone so quick, she said. I'm blessed if she shouldn't have had a dozen. And then she turned to the child. Are you hungry yet? She said. I'm always hungry, was the answer, but 'tain't as bad as it was. Come in here, said the woman, and she held open the shop door. So what is so fascinating about this is Sara was suffering. In the midst of her suffering, she reached out and gave to someone else who she realized was suffering worse than she was. And in that act, she didn't just transform her own self. She didn't just transform the self, the tummy of that child. She transformed the life of someone who was ready to change, who was onlooking, who just needed that example and that model to be like, oh, wait a minute, I can actually do something. And we'll get to what happens with the baker lady in the future. But this is how Sara's carrying herself forward. And that's what I thought was so fascinating about this whole story, is it wasn't about me, me, me. It's about me, me, me all the time. I go into an MMO. It's about me, 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 my time, my time. How am I spending my time, right? We're no longer, the whole point of Final Fantasy XIV is the importance of connecting with the rest of the world. And part of that connecting with the rest of the world is looking out from oneself and asking questions about other people and their lives and connecting meaningfully, not in some sort of like superficial kind of way, connecting meaningfully with the people in your life that have been brought into your sphere on a regular basis. And so one of the fascinating things for me is how Sara is basically a model for controlling your emotions, for treating people equally as having equal value, regardless of where they came from, regardless of who they are. And on top of that, Sara's story offers us a glimpse of what might be in the future. I'll explain why. So things are getting worse and worse for Sara. It's harder and harder to hold on. She's holding on as hard as she can, right? What she doesn't know is that next door there is, well, she knows that the next door gentleman is sick. And she knows that the next door gentleman has an Indian servant. And this Indian servant and that household clearly have come from India recently. And what she does not know is that that gentleman was her father's best friend. And what there's a lot of explanation about what happens, but long and short of it is the diamond mines had never been lost. The friend thought that the deal had fallen through. He thought he had defrauded his own best friend and ruined his own best friend who had invested into it. It had sent him into a brain fever. I guess he could have caught some kind of malaria. And while he was out, while he was underneath this brain fog, while he was out, the captain Crewe died. And now he's sitting on this massive fortune that partially belongs to his friend's child. And he's trying to find this child. And he's looking across Europe, trying to like make contact with Parisian boarding schools, because Sara's mother was French. And so there was this idea that maybe she was sent to Paris. She was sent to France. She was not. She's next door. At the same time, the Indian gentleman's heart is touched by how Sara treated him and the monkey. And he starts telling the story of how Sara is different and how her life is just genuinely crappy. And this is where we start to understand that these people who come in, who are rich and who are affluent, can often live in this bubble, and they don't understand, or they aren't willing to see what is happening. They aren't ready to see what is happening in the world. But some of them are. And this is one particular case where this very, very ill man has a genuinely good heart. And he is actually friends with the large family, because the large family's father is some person who works in law. And so the father of the large family is incidentally helping this sick gentleman find the missing girl. It's a very, very fascinating situation. Everything's kind of neatly tied up together. And of course, for some people, this might be like, okay, well, this is unreal. This is unreal. But that's not the point. One of the modern critiques of this book could be that it just feels a bit too neat. But this is actually what gives it strength, in my opinion, because it's very mythological. It's very much like a fairy tale, really. And I like that aspect of it. And another modern critique, particularly from a certain circle of the culture war, is that the rich people aren't really making sacrifices to help others. And this is something that Burnett touches on. Burnett says, Janet had told Mr. Carrisford about the encounter with the little girl who was not a beggar. He was very much interested, and all the more so when he heard from Ram Dass of the adventure of the monkey on the roof. Ram Dass made for him a very clear picture of the attic in its desolateness, of the bare floor and broken plaster, the rusty empty grate, and the hard narrow bed. Carmichael, he said to the father of the large family after he heard this description, I wonder how many of the attics in this square are like that one, and how many wretched little servant girls sleep on such beds, while I toss on my down pillows loaded and harassed by wealth that is, most of it, not mine. My dear fellow, Mr. Carmichael answered cheerily, the sooner you cease tormenting yourself, the better it will be for you. If you possessed all of the wealth of all of the Indies, you could not set right all the discomforts in the world. And if you begin to refurnish all the attics in the square, there would still remain all the attics in all the other squares and streets to put in order. And there you are. And then Mr. Carrisford, this is the father's friend, says, do you suppose, he says slowly after a pause, do you think it is possible that the other child, the child I never cease thinking of, I believe, could possibly be reduced to any such condition as the poor little soul next door? And this is the irony, right? Because that is exactly what has happened. His best friend's child is reduced to such a condition. Now, what's very, very interesting is this is always the dichotomy. How much can the rich actually help? I'm not going to talk about that in this review. But the fact that Burnett is taking a stab at it in this piece of literature and thinking about it is very, very fascinating. And I don't mind that she doesn't come out in a diatribe against rich people. I think she is being extremely, extremely realistic in many ways, insofar as noting that it's not an easy decision just to start throwing your money out and helping people. There are so many people these days who say, well, you know, if you just shared half your wealth, then so many issues would go away. And there is a truth to that, but there is also a truth that there will never be enough money, because even if you make the poor equal to middle class, the middle class are not happy either. There is never enough. So I think it's a very, very fascinating situation. Either way, what's really, really fun about this book, one of my favorite parts, is that one day when Sara is at a particularly low point, something really, really terrible and sad happens. Basically, Sara's having a really bad day. She's very, very hungry. And Ermengarde is like, oh yeah, I have that food that I got. Because Ermengarde's not quick on the uptake. And Ermengarde's like, oh, wait a minute, I have food like I could share with you. So Ermengarde really represents the out-of-touch rich people who don't understand how much they have. And Ermengarde, however, is kindly-hearted. So she goes and gets this food. And Becky and Ermengarde and Sara have basically a little party in the attic, and they're eating the food, and Miss Minchin catches them, and it's just, well, you know, it's a cluster. And Sara falls onto her bed, and she passes out, you know, devastated. And what she doesn't know is that while she's sleeping, Ram Dass, the Indian gentleman, at the orders of the father's friend, Mr. Carrisford, is transforming her attic while she's sleeping. So when she wakes up, there's new blankets on the bed, there's a fire in the stove, there's new chair and table, there's stuff on the walls, and they've transformed the little attic into a cozy nook. And over the weeks, while she's out working and having a terrible day, every day she returns to find out that her room has been made better. And even Becky's room has mild transformations as well. And Becky is able to share with Sara's magical thing that's happening in Sara's attic room. And this brings back hope again. But she didn't need hope to be strong, but this makes it even strong. Like she's able to carry forward. She's being given a sign that the cosmos is not all dark. There is light. There's goodness. And then, of course, as happens with all of these wonderful fairy tale stories, there's a lovely ending. So basically, the monkey gets free, and Mr. Carrisford, at that same point in time, has met with Mr. Carmichael, the father of the large family, and he's receiving the bad news that the little girl they thought they had found in Paris/Russia is not actually the Sara Crewe that he was looking for, and too young. So they have to start all over again. And it's at this exact moment that the monkey, now caught by Sara, she takes the monkey over to the house. And Ramdas, who I think had a clue, was like, hey, I'm going to get you in and you can bring the monkey straight to my master. And of course, Sara hands over the monkey and a conversation is struck up. And obviously it comes out that she is in fact from India. And then, of course, the conversation's like, oh, who's your dad? What's your family name? And it all comes out. I'm Sara Crewe. My dad was, screwed over by his old friend. And that is when everything falls into place. And within an instant, Sara comes out of poverty into princess again. Now, for a lot of people who want that hardcore realism, this might feel very contrived. I don't think so. I think this is within the realm of a feel-good, happy fairy tale story. In my opinion, hope at the end of all things, the sudden eucatastrophe of hope, is what defined Tolkien's work. It is a profoundly Christian theological thing to hold on to. And I personally believe that even if some people don't want to have that kind of, fakeness in their stories with this kind of happy ever after, I believe that on a thematic and on a philosophical level, the happy ending of A Little Princess points to a greater happy ending that many Christians believe will arrive in the final days. And you may disagree with that. You're welcome to. But I think A Little Princess is such a mental cleanser in this world of disgruntlement and hopelessness that we can hold on to this kind of hope and find light even in the darkness. And that's something that Final Fantasy XIV talks about as well. What's really, really cool is when Sara is elevated, she does not elevate simply herself. Unlike a lot of other people who talk the talk about female solidarity, Sara walks the walk. You see, nowadays, what a lot of people don't understand is that women run down other women all the time. But Sara takes Becky with her, and she continues to be friends with Lottie and Ermengarde. She does have her peace with Miss Minchin in a very respectful way, but she does say something to Miss Minchin, which is great. And even more interestingly enough, she decides that she wants to help the poor and impoverished because she's been there. And so she goes back to that baker lady and she sets up a fund so that if anyone who's homeless or hungry goes to this baker woman, the baker woman will hand out bread and she will pay the baker woman with the money that she has inherited, the massive fortune she's inherited from the diamond mines. And that's when she finds out that the baker woman has actually taken that homeless girl and apprenticed her into the baking trade. And this is where we see how charity is helpful, but also long-term solutions are required in order to actually deal with the problems of impoverishment, particularly in the 1800s, during a time when England and North America were undergoing a massive industrial revolution that resulted in massive forms of human exploitation, okay, that nobody really talks about. But it was extremely exploitative time. It wasn't just Black people that were being exploited. There was indentured slavery that was happening with the Irish, and there were literal hordes and hordes of white, uneducated lower class who were just being crapped on. And so this is really an interesting way for Burnett to kind of end with this look at how money is important, but also it's a community thing where people have to, in some ways, sacrifice a little to help the person next to them. It's not enough just to throw money out. It's also about teaching them self-respect, about education, about so many other things that are helpful to build a stronger society. I also want to say that I really appreciate this book, not just because of the happy ending, even though, like I said, some people might think it's contrived. I also like this book because Miss Minchin gets her comeuppance. You see, Miss Minchin represents a hostile woman. She is a bad woman, very similar to the caretaker in Little Orphan Annie. And I love that kind of bracing approach to male and females. In this book, males aren't shit on, okay? Males are not being chastised for being part of the problem. In this book, the person who is representing institutional corruption is a woman. And I really appreciated that. And what was really, really interesting is that when the time comes, Miss Minchin is Miss Minchin is returning home, and she has to deal with the fact that she is now going to be ruined because most of the girls are going to find out what happened, and she very well might lose all of the girls. And you don't really feel sorry for that. I mean, like, it is what it is, right? It is what it is. But Miss Amelia wakes up. You see, throughout this entire book, there are these two sisters running it, and Miss Minchin is the termagant. She's the one who's in charge. She's brutal, she's harsh, she's neglectful. It's really bad. Miss Amelia is a doormat. So they literally represent the woman that has given into her animus and the woman that has repressed her animus. And Miss Amelia's animus wakes up. And Miss Amelia says, "I'm not as clever as you, sister," she said. "And I'm always afraid to say things to you for fear of making you angry." See, this is fear of what other people are thinking or saying. This is a typical female problem. "Perhaps if I were not so timid, it would be better for the school and for both of us." Hear, hear. "I must say, I often thought it would have been better if you had been less severe on Sara Crewe and had seen that she was decently dressed and more comfortable. I know she was worked too hard for a child of her age, and I know she was only half fed." "How dare you say such a thing?" exclaimed Miss Minchin. I don't know how I dare," Miss Amelia answered, with a kind of reckless courage. "But now I've begun, I may as well finish, whatever happens to me. The child was a clever child and a good child, and she would have paid you for any kindness you had shown her, but you didn't show her any. The fact was, she was too clever for you, and you always disliked her for that reason. She used to see through us both." And her older sister, takes umbrage at this and is freaking out. And then Miss Amelia starts basically getting hysterical. And Miss Amelia spills out and says, she did, she cried. "She saw through us both. She saw that you were a hard-hearted, worldly woman, and that I was a weak fool, and that we were both of us vulgar and mean enough to grovel on our knees before her money and behave ill to her because it was taken from her, though she behaved herself like a little princess even when she was a beggar. She did, like a little princess. And now you've lost her," she cried wildly, "and some other school will get her and her money. And if she were like any other child, she'd tell how she's been treated, and all her pupils would be taken away, and we should be ruined. And it serves us right, but it serves you right more than it does me, for you are a hard woman, Maria Minchin. You are a hard, selfish, worldly woman." What I really liked about that whole thing is it's a reminder for both men and women that we can sometimes fail to speak out. And by failing to speak out in a positive or constructively critical way, we allow injustices to continue. And Amelia, by not confronting her sister, allowed injustice to continue. And what I really, really liked about it is how Amelia realizes that Sara behaved like a princess even when she wasn't being treated like one. And it brings me back once again to my contention about Final Fantasy XIV. You see, I do not believe the Warrior of Light in Final Fantasy XIV is actually very special. Yes, they were part of the Convocation. That's true. But there were 13 other members on that council. There were other people in that world that they hailed from that were equally talented and amazing. But being special doesn't make you respect yourself. And this is the important lesson that we can learn from both Final Fantasy XIV and Sara. We don't have to be special to have self-respect. We don't have to be special to value ourselves. And we certainly don't have to be special in order to treat ourselves and act like we are special. And that is the difference between Azim and Sara and many, many of us in modern society. See, we believe that we have to be special in order to act special, in order to love ourselves, in order to respect ourselves. But Sara is a lesson that you don't have to be, in fact, special to value yourself as a human being and to behave accordingly. And that is, unfortunately, a lesson that many people lack. And I wish that A Little Princess could be returned to curriculum in schools because it is very, very meaningful. I just want to let everyone know that Francis Hodgson Burnett herself, according to the information in the afterword, did not come from a very, very happy background all the time. She lost her father. Her family moved overseas to North America, and she ended up having to work away, trying to help keep her family afloat. It was a very difficult time for her and her family, and much of her writing came out of the need to make money. And she ended up writing romances and things because that's what would sell. So Francis Hodgson Burnett wasn't coming from a place of privilege and telling us, oh, this is what you should do, this is how you should carry out your life. These are clearly ideas and themes that she revisits in The Secret Garden, in Little Lord Fauntleroy. And the stories that we remember from her are not her romances that she wrote to make money. It's these books. Now, the book that I own has a little afterword, and they cover Francis Hodgson Burnett's life. But they also talk about some thoughts and themes. I'm going to read some of this section and then finish up with this now extremely long book review. The glory of the novel, Little Princess, is its insistence that character, in the old sense of inner character, is triumphant and everlasting. The word character is out of style. We speak rather of self-awareness, of a sense of identity, of knowing who we are. These newer terms, useful as they may be, do not quite substitute for what character once represented. Self-awareness refers to knowledge of self, but not to the content or nature of that self. Character is what Sara Crewe possesses in abundance. It is intimately linked with other unstylish notions, such as honor and dignity. It is the quality that enables Sara to endure her hardships, giving way to rage or self-pity or despair. The idea of character as an innate and stable quality withstanding life's turbulence is what sets Burnett's writing apart from current modes of thinking. She died in 1924, before the Depression and the Second World War ushered in an era of skepticism and insecurity. Yet, paradoxically, it is what keeps A Little Princess real and vital, more than its romantic fantasies of royalty and luxury and fine clothes. No wonder children of any era can love its heroine. The glamour of integrity is ageless. And then, a bit later on, this writer writes, I heard a great deal of rage when I was small, very vocal and very terrifying, and I thought it must be powerful. It was certainly loud. I've spent a lifetime learning that loudness is not a show of strength, and that the spirit is kept alive by consciousness and trust in the inner voice, by holding firmly to the unnamed thing that Sara at age 11 had found, the stronger thing that makes you hold rage in. Nowadays, when the full expression of feelings is considered the mark of emotional well-being, Sara's reserve, her determination that no one know her true feelings, may strike us as alien. Even Miss Minchin is unsettled by Sara's demeanor after her father's death. Okay, and so then she quotes some of the book, and in it, it says Miss Minchin might almost have had more patience with her if Sara had cried. She was a woman who liked to domineer and feel her power, and as she looked at Sara's pale little steadfast face and heard her proud little voice, she quite felt as if her might was being set at naught. So you see, if you have your inner strength and your self-discipline, no one else can control you. By telling you to give in to your emotions all the time, our society is not teaching you power or self-empowerment. They are teaching you disempowerment because they're taking away your inner ability to be strong. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about the devouring mother in society. Because the devouring mother in society does not want her children to be strong. The devouring mother wants the children to always need her. And Sara represents a move to maturity where she still feels emotion, she still feels upset, but she is not allowing herself to be controlled by another person, unnecessarily so. And this is why this book is very, very powerful. Now, Miss Minchin is right, continues this afterword author. Her might is being set at naught by a will firmer than her own. In the clamor of self-expression, this power is subversive, even revolutionary. Giving vent to every feeling may provide a quick comfort, but true self-possession has more lasting rewards. As Sara knows, the power that must perpetually assert itself is no power at all. True power is confident and has no need of display. And I just think that that is so true. At one point in the book, Sara says, I never answer when I can help it. When people are insulting you, there's nothing so good for them as not to say a word, just to look at them and think. When you will not fly into a passion, people know you are stronger than they are because you're strong enough to hold in your rage. There's nothing so strong as rage, except what makes you hold it in. That's stronger. And this is, I felt like my mind was being cleansed. Reading the afterword, reading the book first, and then reading the afterword after, I felt like my mind was being cleansed. I felt like I needed to hear this, right? I feel like if you have not read A Little Princess to the young people in your life, to the young people in your community, to the young people in your family, you need to, tomorrow, set aside a little time at night to read for an hour, just one chapter. It will be done within a week. And as you read, talk to them and get them thinking about what they're listening to. A Little Princess isn't actually super preachy. There are moments where there's obviously a statement being made, but I think this statement is something that has gone out of fashion and it needs to be brought back. So yeah, I highly recommend A Little Princess. And even if you don't want to read it, I recommend you listen to the audiobook. It's still very, very moving and beautiful story. And maybe to our jaded, skeptical, critical modern minds, a story like A Little Princess might feel strange and weird, but I think it's a palate cleanser. It helps us reorient and go, oh yeah, how am I doing? Because it's very, very easy for us to look sideways at the woman falling to her knees and reeing over Trump being voted in. It's very easy for us to get on a pedestal and make fun of the disingenuous intellectuals that are crowding into our universities. It's not as easy for us to consider ourselves and where we're at, whether we have reached the level of Sara Crewe, whether we are behaving as we ought to online. So I really, really love this book, and it was great to reread it again and understand again. Ah, yes, this is fantastic. So yeah, that's where I'm going to end it. I'm going to end it with encouragement for everyone to go out, get a copy, read it, listen to it. I'm sure it's somewhere out there on audiobook. I hope you enjoy it. Have a good day.